Joining us now, Republican Congressman, 9th District of Virginia, Morgan Griffith. Congressman, good to have you with us, sir.
Good to be with you. It has been a long time. Sorry it's taken us so long to get back together.
Well, I know you've been very busy there, but your staff is fabulous to work with. The big thing in Congress right now is another budget compromise that's trying to go down the pike, and everybody's kind of scratching their head, Congressman, thinking, well, what's going to happen at the end of the day is nothing will get done. We'll get to November, there'll be a crisis, and then it'll be the same thing all over again. How do we stop this train?
Well, it's certainly, that's certainly a likely outcome. However, there are a number of us working behind the scenes, and look, I think members of leadership are trying to figure this thing out too. The last deal, Boehner deal, locked a number in for discretionary spending. And the Senate said they would make sure that got to the floor, and that would be a different scenario. And so some people thought that was okay, but only 79 Republicans voted for that plan. And so now the new leadership team, with Paul Ryan at the helm, is trying to figure out, okay, how do we guarantee that we actually get something out of the Senate, or at least to the Senate floor, without having a lot of support for that discretionary spending number? Well, as you know, John, because we've had these conversations, discretionary spending, mandatory spending, still spending. And that what we ought to be doing is taking a look at some of the mandatory spending side, because what people don't realize is mandatory spending is a lot more than the big name programs. There are hundreds of programs, thousands even, that are considered mandatory spending. So the Wild Horse program out west, where we give, I call it retirement homes. They're not exactly retirement homes, but retirement homes for wild horses is mandatory spending, but military defense is discretionary. And what a number of us are looking for is some way that we can make a cut in mandatory spending equal to the increase on the discretionary side, a lot of which goes to the military.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore come up with the same number that we were spending last year, and yet satisfy the deal that Boehner made, and yet satisfy those of us that want to see this budget brought under control, but also want to see the military get the money that it needs. I think it can be done. There's 2 or 3 different plans out there. It's not going to be easy, and it may not happen, but that's what we're working for behind the scenes.
So it's kind of a behind the scenes. You guys are trying to get out of this vicious cycle that we're in. And I know that one of your colleagues, Rob Whitman, has been railing against this last-minute budget deal forever. He's actually got legislation in that says that if you don't pass a budget by a certain time, you don't get paid, which isn't going anywhere, but it's not a bad idea. Congressman Griffith, tell us about the Freedom Caucus. As we get into the next session, what real level of influence does your group of conservatives, the Freedom Caucus, actually have now?
Well, I think it has a fair amount of influence. I mean, we are a small group within the greater body. Then we have people who are not members of the Freedom Caucus, but who agree with us. And so we do have a fair amount of influence. And in fact, a lot of the discussions that have been taking place have been leadership talking with members of the Freedom Caucus to try to figure out how we can resolve this dilemma. There are others. And, of course, there are folks who put military spending above all else, and sometimes that creates a dilemma. But I do think if we allow ourselves to change those rules, or at least waive the rules, we waive the rules on lots of stuff, and allow us to get to mandatory spending and cut some of these things that need to be cut, that really ought to be looked at. And, folks always want to hear Social Security and Medicaid. That's not really what we're talking about. But cut some of these other programs in mandatory spending so that we can have those offsets to spend the money where we think it's more appropriate, like defense, then I think that works. But you never get a good deal when it's a last-minute deal, and that's why we're working on it now, and we've been working on it in March and April, as opposed to waiting until the last week of September and going, oh, my gosh, October 1's right around the corner. What are we going to do?
Right.
I give leadership credit for that, because in the past, everybody else was kept in the dark. There weren't discussions with the Freedom Caucus or even general members before the Freedom Caucus was formed. Leadership just sat back and said, we're working on it. And then come September, well, we got nothing. And now it's the entire conference is invited to work on these problems and try to resolve these problems. And whether or not it works, only time will tell. But I give credit to Speaker Ryan for at least opening up the process and letting us all in.
We're with 9th District of Virginia Republican Congressman Morgan Griffith. Congressman, would you say that you are pleasantly surprised with the Paul Ryan regime now? I know you were skeptical when he came in, although you did vote for him. I remember you said you voted for him. I think your phrase was eyes wide open, which I thought was really summed it up. You said my eyes are wide open on it. 6-7 months into it, would you classify yourself as satisfied with his leadership or skeptical?
Well, I still think there's a lot to be done, so I'm not going to say I'm completely satisfied, but I do think he's opened up the process. Very appreciative of that. I know that he wants to reform the process. There are some, mostly staffers in the upper circles who are resisting some of the changes that I think need to be made. But I think Speaker Ryan is very open to them. We're having more discussions. We're having another hearing, I think, next week on a rule change that would help us get to some of these mandatory spending cuts, not just on this deal, but going forward. It's kind of got an interesting history to it because folks don't realize it, but you used to be able to cut mandatory spending in the Appropriations Committee or on the floor, and this little problem happened for the Democrats back in the 80s called Ronald Reagan. And he started getting the folks on the Republican side when we were in the minority working with some of the more moderate conservative Democrats, and they started cutting mandatory spending on the floor. And so the Democrats came up with a rule that said you couldn't do that. We're just trying to reverse that, and I'm trying to reverse that. And what's interesting is it's Rule 21(2)B and C. About 10 years ago, there was a young congressman who proposed changing Rule 21(2)B, and that was Paul Ryan. And so he is not an alien to these concepts, and I'm really looking forward to it. But it's still got a lot of resistance, but he's at least opened the door. We're having discussions. The entire conference is now talking about these things. That's healthy for America.
Well, look, it sounds like you guys are definitely moving the ball, and I think that's what all of us are looking for is some form of progress. Congressman, you're no stranger to political conventions. Some might say you're a convention warrior. You served in the General Assembly of Virginia for some time. You made it to leadership. So you've been at your share of convention battles in Virginia on the Republican side. It appears right now, my math says Trump goes into Cleveland with 1,200. I think somewhere between 1,190, 1,180, 1,205. That's where my math has him. I think he's going to be about 3 dozen short going in. How do you see that playing out?
Well, it's going to be tough because Trump really needs to get it on the first ballot by hook or crook if he's going to win. Now, understand, I've not endorsed any candidates, so I'm just giving you my political analysis.
Exactly.
And so he's really got to win it on the first ballot or have enough votes lined up on the second ballot that come his way to offset those that he loses on the second ballot. So I think it's, from a political standpoint, I know he's started to bring in some folks who have some expertise on conventions. I think that's smart. But it's if he doesn't get it on the first ballot, it's going to be tough and it's going to drag in. Now, the rules are very important. Do they have low man drop out, or is it just a slugfest until somebody gets over the top? These are issues that are going to be very important in deciding how this thing goes. Because if you have low man drop out, and then the question is, does Rubio have his name put in nomination even though he suspended his campaign, but he's got 100 and some delegates, so he's the first low man out, keeping Kasich in? If his name's not put in nomination, then does Kasich stay in and he's the low man out? You've got all those kinds of things. The rules have not been definitively set yet. That's something that the Rules Committee and the entire floor delegation, those people who are actually seated on the floor when the vote comes up on the rules, most years people don't really pay much attention to that. This year's going to be critical, and the Trump folks have to be ready, looking for those both Trojan horses and ambushes coming in that Rules Committee stuff, because that's where for all the campaigns, Cruz, Trump, Kasich, anybody else, the rules are really going to determine how that floor fight goes, and it's extremely important that they have a handle on that. I believe whoever controls the Rules Committee and the rules process will control the entire convention.
Wow. Now, Congressman, how does that happen? I know there's 112 delegates, somebody told me, that make up rules, and how are they nominated? I mean, who makes the chairman and who gets on there?
Well, and of course, all of this can be changed in theory, because once you get to the convention and the gavel comes down on the opening day, the convention itself governs everything. So no matter what the folks who are currently at the RNC may propose, the convention floor controls it. So if the convention floor decides it wants to upset the apple cart and change the rules committee that's been appointed, they certainly have that power. They actually have tremendous power. It's an entirely new body, and they can do really whatever they want. So, that's why those people who show up for the very boring, very early meetings and sessions on the floor are really going to control the process if they know what they're doing. And so that's where you're going to see a lot of stuff go on. This year's convention ought to be very exciting in those early days when normally in the early hours in the first day, it's just kind of drudgery because none of the excitement happens. The presidential candidates usually don't show up.
Right.
That's where it's all going to be decided, and they can decide to change the rules committee if they wish to.
So we're basically
normally it would be the chairman and the national committeemen and women who would make those decisions, but they make recommendations really, and convention can overturn all of it.
So what we're really talking about is Monday and Tuesday in Cleveland morning, which is normally nothing happens. I remember the last two I was at. Tampa on Monday got shut down because there was a weather issue, but I forget what was the one I went to before Tampa, but like in Philadelphia in 2000, New York 2004, Minneapolis 2008, right? Nothing happens Monday and Tuesday. You just don't do anything. So what you're saying is now that's going to be where everything is decided.
I believe that to be the case, because normally what happens is those are rubber stamp meetings. Here's what we recommend. Everybody goes, okay, no problem. Now that's where decisions are going to be made that are so important to the end outcome that I think that both sides of this debate are going to have their people there ready to go into battle. And if you don't show up, then you lose.
So basically, the 100 and some odd people that are going to make up rules that are nominated for that, those nominations have to be sanctioned by the entire delegation on the floor, Congressman Griffith, or are they just picked by the chairman? Again,
the floor can overturn it. Normally, they would be picked by the established pattern, which the chairman and then the RNC National Committee women and committee men would make those decisions, but the floor ratifies all of that, and the floor can overturn that. And so that's where it becomes important, and that's why on those early days, usually it's a rubber stamp situation. Committees are meeting, they roll it out, everybody just, there's maybe 50 people milling around on the floor, and they all vote aye, and away we go. Should be a completely different scenario this year. That's going to be, I hope you're getting there early, because that's when the action's going to happen, I believe.
Well,
not that it won't happen on the big days, but the groundwork will be laid in those early days.
It is, in fact. Regardless, I'm running for delegate with my Trump team in the 4th District. So regardless, even if we win, obviously I'll be there. If not, I'll be on Radio Row. But we had already been talking about that internally because I'm being picked up by a major station in Florida as well for my coverage. So we're actually talking about doing my first day there on Friday just to set the stage, because when you get on the air at 6 a.m. Monday, the first meeting is going to be at 8 a.m. We're going to get information trickling up, so that's going to be very interesting. Now, Congressman, I know you'll be there as part of the Republican delegation from Virginia. Will you be a delegate as well?
Well, I will not. I'm not going to run to be a delegate. I'm not going to be an alternate. I was an alternate once back in '92. My wife Hillary went as an alternate to the last convention. Look, I get to do a lot of these things, and I really love my job. But I feel like it's a better spot. I'm not saying others who are in Congress shouldn't do it, but I think it's a better spot because I can get floor credentials as a congressman.
Right.
And so I'm leaving that. We're having our convention this weekend. We've got, I think, 15 people running for 3 slots as delegate and 3 slots as alternate. I'm letting folks who are out there doing the grassroots work every day, they'll figure that out at our convention, but they're the ones who will get to go with the credentials as a delegate or an alternate, and I think that's the right way to go. So while I'll be watching it very closely, I will not be credentialed as a delegate or an alternate.
All right, we're out of time. I want to thank Congressman Morgan Griffith, Republican, 9th District of Virginia, for being with us there. District Convention is this Saturday. They're going to nominate the 3 people that go to Cleveland. We'll see how that plays out. As always, a trough of important information we get from the congressman. Congressman, you have a great weekend. Give my best to your lovely bride and your family.
Will do.
All right. This is the John Fredericks Radio Network.